Welcome back to the C++ Bootcamp. Last time we talked about the for loop, and we kind of started to hint at the difference between the for loop, the while loop, and the do while loop, but I figured what we do is go ahead and revisit. And let's do something a little interesting by converting a for loop into a while loop, and then a while loop into a do while loop, and hopefully that will help you gain more confidence with this particular kind of programming construct. So let's see. When we think about program development, we think about input, processing, and output. And the reason that I keep saying this is because I'm hoping that it will make it easier to you as you think about what it is that program development really means. And it helps you get more familiar with the confidence that you need to be able to solve problems, because when you think about programming, it's really just about problem solving. So without further ado, let's look at what we were doing the last time. So we had a student score average calculation, and the only thing that we were doing was we were initializing our student test scores and then calling the function and calculating that average. Now, we have our initial definition of student tests here, and we're using a for loop to do that initialization. Now, let's think about it a little in terms of what we're doing. So when we make a for loop, we've got our three components of a for loop. We've got the initialization, and then semicolon, the condition, and then semicolon, the iteration. Now this form is what allows us to initialize the list, and it's also what allows us to calculate the average. So for loops allow you to, for loops allow you to build up what you need to be able to do the iteration. And in our case, what we did was we said unsigned int s is equal to 0, and while s, and actually we can do this way, just for readability. So while s is less than 30, and then to iterate, we say plus plus s. And then we're able to do our iteration, and everything works like we expect. So things to be mindful of are the following. So we put this outside when we wanted to make sure that if we didn't have the initialization step, which is done here, that we would still be able to have this variable s and use it to index our student test array and then fill it in with values. So the first thing is, how do we convert this for loop into a while loop? Now, the structure of a while loop is very similar. The while loop says while condition, and then do whatever you're going to do. So to convert the for loop into a while loop and have it execute the same instructions exactly like we did when we had this for loop, we're going to take this statement and move it into the while structure. And the first thing we notice is we need to be able to keep up with this variable s. And when I say keep up, I mean we need a declaration and a definition. So what I've got here is a declaration and a definition. But normally you would just say it's a definition, and it's because we've already said the type, the variable name, and then the initial value. So if we only said that we had something that was an unsigned integer but didn't give it a value, that's a declaration. I'm telling the compiler that I need a variable that's an unsigned integer, and I need it to have a label of s. Now, there are times when the compiler doesn't have to listen to us, but we don't need to worry about that just yet. So the first thing, though, is we have our initialization step that has been removed, and now we have our condition. So the condition would then get moved into the condition block. So s is less than 30, And now we've almost got enough, but now we also need to take care of the iteration step, which is plus plus s. So in order for this to work like the for loop, we need to put it after the initial after each step where we're adding the value into the array. So once we do that, we end up with our while loop, and it operates just like our for loop. And we don't need our for loop anymore. So then we'll be able to get rid of it, and if we save and then execute, we'll see that it operates exactly like what we had before. Oh, I'm sorry, I just introduced an issue. So let me go ahead and clear that up first. Right, so this is a warning, so we don't have to worry about it. But this is an error. So uninitialized local variable s is used. So that I'm using this variable, to act as a condition, but I haven't given the variable a value. So the first step would be we need to give it that value. So once we get at the initial value and we have our condition, we're going to set each location to this double value, and then we're going to increment s. And it's because s is the thing that's going to make this loop go over and over again until it completes. So now if we do another build and run it, we should see that it works like we expect. And that's exactly what you're trying to do. I mean, everything at the beginning should be simple, and it's because you don't want to get bogged down in the details. So we see our student test average is 85.65 like we expected, and everything is well, right? It's all good. So we've taken our for loop, which had the initialization, condition, and iteration, and converted it into a while loop that operated the same way. But we had to take the initialization, place it above the while loop, take the condition, use the condition in the while loop's condition block, and then the iteration step has to happen inside of the function instead of defining that iteration step before you even get into the loop, because the compiler in this case would handle the automatic incrementing, and in the while loop we have to do that ourselves. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's go ahead and talk about the do while. And having these three at our disposal, we should be able to solve some problems that are, relatively straightforward, but they still rely on you to make a choice about which one you'd want to use. So, okay, we've got our while loop with a condition block, and then we've got the operation that we want to have happen. Now with a do while loop, it looks like what you would expect. So do, and then while, where the condition block is here, like we would expect, and the operation happens in the same set of brackets. But notice that the while is in a different place. So the reason that is because the do while loop says, I'm going to do this operation once, and then I'm going to check to see if I need to keep doing it. The while loop said, while this condition has not been met, I'm going to keep iterating. So I haven't iterated yet. I haven't done anything in the brackets yet in this case. But in this case, the do runs the stuff in the brackets the first time and then uses the while as a condition after the fact. So if you don't want your things run before your condition is checked, then you need a while loop. And furthermore, if you want to manage the variables that you use in your looping structure, you need a for loop for that. So let's look back at what we did for the for loop. So the for loop would have our initialization, semicolon, condition, and then iteration. And finally, the brackets. So the for loop and the while loop look the most similar, but the condition in the while loop is only one component of the for loop. Also, another thing here is that okay, so in the do while case, I'm sorry, let me finish what I was explaining. So when you have a for loop, you don't need to define your variable out here if you're only going to use it inside the loop. In the while case, you need to define your variables outside of the while, because the while condition and the steps to operate on inside of the brackets need to be defined. And then for the do is the same thing. So you'd have to say, your unsigned s outside of any use for the while loop and the do loop. And for the do, you need to be careful. If you don't mean to run these things first, then you need a while loop. Now, let's see. So let me go ahead and remove the while and the for, and we'll execute the do while just so that you can see it will work. But it works in a way that you have to just be expecting. Otherwise, it might surprise you when it runs that first time. And then let's see. So the condition should be while s is less than 30. So if we build this and then run the debug session, we'll see that it's going to give us the same value. Okay. So nothing too fancy, but again, you need to understand what these things are. So if you see them in code that's a little bit more complicated, you at least know what they do and how they operate and why the person that put them there might be using them. So let's circle back and talk about the for loop. Now, the for loop has a lot more components. Well, not a lot more, but just it has 3 components instead of the 1 component of the do loop and the while loop. So let's see, if we put back everything we had, so we've got our initialization, our condition, and our iteration. We don't need a semicolon at the end of this either. So that's just something to be mindful of. It's like in the while loop, we didn't need it either. Okay, so let's get rid of this do. All right, so you got the unsigned s less than 30 plus do the increment. We don't need this. Now, if you don't want to have do while, and you don't want to use while, but you want to use for, and you want to be able to have the same capabilities as the while loop or the do while loop, we'll look at how we can modify for to make that happen, so that you don't have to change the looping structure that you're using, but you will have to change the way that you go about making use of for. So let's make sure this, and it still works like we expect. So now revisiting, if I want for loop to act like a while loop, then I need to make sure that the initialization is out at the top. So I won't use the initialization, I will use the condition, and I won't use the iteration, but I will need to use the iteration on the inside. So if I do that, it's going to operate just like a while loop. And when we run it, it's going to give us the same result, but it acted just like the while loop. So hopefully that gives you a bit more insight into for loops, while loops, and do while loops. We've been able to do this and talk about it in a straightforward way. And I'm going to continue to keep adding concepts, but these are some fundamental operations that you should be familiar with. And I hope that this video has been informative. If you find that you like what we're talking about and you want to continue to keep up the conversation, be able to follow along, don't be afraid to subscribe. If you like what I'm saying, but you feel like I'm missing something, leave me comments. If you like what you've seen, hit the like button. Thanks for viewing, and I hope to see you all again next time.